Welcome to The Dope, an online business magazine committed to the cause of sustainability in the travel industry. This is Shoba Mohan, championing this cause, something which is very close to my heart, and this effort to make a difference in why and how people travel, and as an industry, how we can be and bring about the change. Today, we have with us CB Ramkumar, a gentleman I've known for quite a long time now, over 10 years. And I think between the time we were actively in touch to what you are today, you've been, I see from your from the beautiful profile you shared and from your website that you've traversed quite a bit, and it's very heartening to see the journey, the kind of progress you've made in this arena of sustainability. Welcome on the show, Ram. It's really, really great to see you. Really look forward to listening to you about sustainability, something that Dope has been trying to champion, and I work with them as their ambassador for sustainability. And to have your views and thoughts both on the industry and outside of it, and also your personal journey, is what I would be looking at. Welcome on the show, Ram.
Thank you, Shoba. It's good to be here. And yes, a lot has happened over the last 10, 14 years. So let's talk about that.
So to begin with, let's talk about your journey. You were in the advertising industry, and you lived a long time. You were in outside of India, right? You were abroad, and then where did it all begin?
Yes, I was outside the country for 17 years, and I came back to India with my project, which is Our Native Village, where I wanted to build a model for sustainable living. Frankly, I've never been a hospitality or a tourism person because I was in the world of advertising and marketing all my life. But the land on which I built the resort, we've owned the land for over 3 decades now. We bought it mainly to heal my father-in-law who had a cardiac condition, and we didn't want him to go back to sea. He was the captain of a ship. And so we bought the land for that. And in the course of the journey of farming that we did, like I said, almost 3 decades ago, I saw instances of what I call man-made poverty, where the farmer of yesteryears was stripped of his traditional knowledge of farming, where he knew how to live in harmony with nature. He could smell the air, look at the clouds, and figure out whether it's going to be a drought this coming year or not, and he would plant accordingly. So he knew how to manage his farm and how to live in harmony with nature. But unfortunately, the Green Revolution inadvertently stripped them of that knowledge. During the Green Revolution, farmers were told, be a modern farmer, don't depend on just the rain to water your crops. And as a socialist country, we gave them all a free borewell and told them, now you can get water whenever you want, not when the rain gods smile at you. And when he got dependent on that one phenomenal invention called the borewell, we unfortunately pulled the plug and said, sorry, no electricity, because Industrial Revolution was also progressing in India, and we wanted more electricity for industry rather than farmers, though we are an agrarian society, right? That's when I saw instances where farmers just couldn't farm. All they could do was just grow some bitter gourds, or the gourds that require much less water. And they were steeped in poverty. And I saw firsthand, on my farm and all my neighboring farmers here, whenever I used to come down to India, I used to work on the farm. I saw such instances. And that's when I said that, we seem to have progressed. But if this is what progress is, which is steeping farmers in complete poverty, then our definition of progress is flawed, in my opinion. We managed to put a man on the moon, but yet we couldn't get the basic services for a farmer. Electricity, water, all that the farmer needs to subsist. And our dependence on farming and food was so heavy because, the country had already gone through a food security issue in the late 60s and late 70s. So with all that, I told myself, hang on, there's something wrong in the way we are looking at the way we need to live itself. Yeah, farmers and farming was my focus because I was seeing that, firsthand, close to me. That's when I told myself that our dependence on resources that are not in our control, outside our control, is so heavy. I said that, what can we do to reduce that dependence? What can we do to eliminate that dependence? Because if that dependence is what is leading to poverty, I said that, is there a way we can live a far more sustainable life where we jump over these dependence and emerge in a much more progressive manner? So I set about telling myself that I will develop a model for sustainable living where we live a 360-degree self-sustaining lifestyle, mainly keeping in mind, farmers and farming in the country. And when I wanted to build this model, I realized that it needs to be a robust model. To build a robust model, you need to use a sector which demands robustness. And that's why I chose a resort or a hotel, if you want to call it, where I told myself that, a guest in a resort or a hotel is quite demanding. They don't care where the electricity comes from, whether it comes from the sun or the wind or whatever. They demand that they want 24/7 electricity. When they open the tap, there's got to be water, hot water 24/7. Now, how do we achieve all this in a sustainable manner was a challenge I took on. And as I started my journey, I spoke to a lot of stalwarts in the hospitality industry. And all of them told me that, living sustainably is possible. There were resorts in Costa Rica, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, 100% eco resorts. But you had to truly be part of that, in the sense that if you wanted water, you would go down to a stream and get your water. You walked around with a lamp in the night. You had, nature visiting you in the form of creepy crawlies in your room. You slept on the ground. And, typically, in the Indian context, I call it as, you had to drink goat's milk and eat peanuts. But I also gathered that the modern traveler wants all his creature comforts. The moment we walk into a resort or a hotel, one of the first things that my wife used to check is, are the toilets decent? Are the sheets clean? Is the room well kept? Aesthetics and creature comforts is very important. So my challenge started to morph into, how do we develop a 360-degree self-sustaining model in a resort where all the creature comforts are available? So it's a modern luxury resort, yet it is sustainable.
Let's talk about our native village. So let's look at all the elements that you looked at when you built it as a model, right? So right from architecture, for instance. So let's go over each and everything.
Yes. So my objective was to build a resort which had, like I said, all the creature comforts. And I realized we had achieved it when I was in London to receive the Responsible Travel Awards many moons ago. And one of the jury members, actually, he came up to me and he said, "My God, do you know what you've achieved?" And that's when really it drove home, because I was doing everything just out of passion and intuitively. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We've never ever seen a resort, a luxury resort, which has all the comforts, yet it is sustainable. So I don't think you realize what you've done. You achieved that." And
yes,
frankly, when he said it, is when it sort of, the point kind of drove home for me, saying, oh yeah, he's right. And because I hadn't done homeworks on hundreds of resorts, and that's when I started to do some research. And I realized that, yes, this is what we had done. So at our native village, from an energy, water, waste management, architecture, food chain, and supply chain,
yes,
all of these were based on sustainable platforms. Because remember, I wanted to build a model for sustainability. So those days, I used to generate 70% of my electricity myself, where I had a windmill, I had solar panels, And I had a huge, battery bank, my own mini grid, so to speak, 280 batteries those days, where I built an entire building just to house the batteries, where I used to generate electricity and store all the electricity in the batteries. And what I also did was I generated a lot of biogas. I had 2 biogas plants, and I generated biogas and used that biogas as fuel to run a generator to produce electricity. So I got a Prakash diesel generator, I still remember, and we changed the carburetor so that it can take methane as fuel rather than diesel. And we generated electricity with that. So I used to store all my biogas in huge biogas balloons, as I call them. Really polythene bags that 15 cubic feet polythene bags, 6 of them. So I used to store the gas in there. And whenever I needed electricity, I used to either get it from, so my working model was, when there is sun, I get electricity. When there is no sun and there is only wind and rain, my windmill generates electricity. When both the sun god and the wind gods decide to take a nap, I had my generator to generate electricity using methane. So that was the model that I built. And 70% of electricity we used to generate ourselves those days.
Fantastic.
So that is as far as energy was concerned. So as far as, energy for hot water, because it's a critical component in a place like Bangalore, it gets quite cold. I had solar panels, of course, the obvious thing, I had a solar water heater. But I also told myself that, what if all my guests, I had 24 rooms, so let's say 40, 50 people, what if all of them have a hot water bath at 8 in the evening, and next morning, 4 o'clock, for whatever reason, they want to have another hot water bath. There is no sun, then what do I do, right? Because I need the hot water 24/7. So we did a lot of research, with the help of my architects, and we hit upon what is known as a Gujarat Boiler. Don't ask me why it's called a Gujarat Boiler. I've asked all my Gujarati friends and they don't know why it's called a Gujarat Boiler. I think it's just a smart boiler, I guess, and that's why it's called a Gujarat Boiler.
It's called a Gujarat Boiler,
Yeah, the Gujarat Boiler, it has, copper inside because copper conducts heat very well. It's much like the tea boilers that you see, in Tamil Nadu, on the roads of Tamil Nadu, which is a copper boiler. So the Gujarat Boiler is designed in such a way that just a handful of woody biomass, I fire it up, and in about 15-20 minutes, I get about 600-700 liters of boiling hot water. So that was my option, just in case, like I said, you need hot water early in the morning, and that wasn't. So that was my energy mix, right? From a water perspective, I had a huge 84,000 liter tank into which I used to store all the rainwater that we used to accumulate on all our roofs. So we had regular schedules on how the roofs had to be cleaned, every 15-20 days, not just the garden and the rooms. The roofs had to be cleaned. So the SOPs, so to speak, in a hotel were very different in mine because we ran it very differently. So, and then what I also did was, all the water that falls on the grounds, which I can't store, I dug 6 or 7 rainwater recharge wells around my property. And all the rainwater went and recharged the only bore well that I was using. So to ensure that I had water security, I ensured that my bore wells were also recharged. Remember that of the 3-acre plot in which the resort was, only 20% was built up, as part of the whole sustainability planning cycle. Also, you build as less as possible so that you reduce your footprint on Mother Earth. So only 20% buildings I had from which to harness rainwater that was usable rainwater that we would filter and use for guests. Rest of it was falling on the ground. So I had to harness that also. So that was harvested in the form of recharge wells. And then we did a lot of other things from a water perspective. In the kitchen, when we used to wash all our vessels, we used to use shikakai and wood ash, which is what we always used in the villages those days, to wash our vessels, and it washes it very, very well. So I used to use that, only reason being that water I wanted to reuse for my garden. If I used detergents, then that would be toxic for my garden. So that was out of question for me. So as you can see, we took a lot of, a very detailed look at our water use. Though my borewell, I had water at about 140, 100 feet to 50 feet those days, I still was very, very cautious, when I used my water. So that's the story as far as the water was concerned. My architecture, yes, every single brick with which I built my resort were handmade bricks with soil from our land. We were blessed with clay soil. So it had to be mixed a bit to stabilize it, so to speak. Because just clay bricks won't last. They would tend to melt when it rains or insects would bore into them. So the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore has developed what is known as stabilized mud bricks, where about 2%, 5% cement is used and some quarry dust is used. And it's hand molded and only sun dried. It's not even fired in a brick.
Yeah.
So we talk about embodied energy in a building, which is how much of energy goes into building a building, how much of energy is used for the bricks, for the concrete, for the cement, for the steel, in the forging the steel, a lot of energy is used. So if you look at it from all that perspective, our embodied energy is probably the lowest you can ever think of, because we use very little cement and very little steel. All my roofs were what is called jack-arch panels, which used, clay tiles that were just strung together with thin GI wires. So the amount of iron we used also was much less. So and then from an architectural perspective, to ensure that all the rooms remained cool, though the clay bricks in themselves ensured that a room was much cooler than a regular room made out of brick and mortar. We were all used to, storing water in clay matkas, right? And it stays much, much cooler than it would in a regular steel vessel. It's the same principle, using clay to regulate your temperature. But we went one step beyond that. We ensured that the design of the rooms was such that any hot air that accumulates in the room was allowed to escape. Now, we don't realize that hot air in a room rises. As long as you allow that hot air a space to escape, your rooms will be much cooler. But these days we build buildings where it's all sealed completely and the hot air is there, and you put on the fan and the AC and the hot air churns in that place. So if you allow it to escape, then the room will be much cooler. So we had little heat vents, close to the roof so that the hot air could escape. Then all our windows, we had broad windows, narrow windows, were positioned in a manner that even the slightest breeze would get funneled into the rooms. And all our rooms are oriented towards the west. So, and we had prevailing westerly winds where we are now. So even the slightest breeze, so we ensured that we were oriented so that we will get all the wind. And even when the wind came in, we ensured that it was funneled into the rooms. So a mixture of the clay bricks, the heat escapes, the design of the windows, the orientation, all ensured that the rooms are at least 3 to 4 degrees cooler than it was outside. So that's from an architecture perspective.
And also light. And also very
And of
light.
course.
Yeah,
absolutely. We had some large windows, where you could get a lot of light. You remember my restaurants? They were all completely open restaurants.
Open restaurants.
My conference room, so to speak, or my activity room, which is a pyramid hall, you could open it from all sides that you didn't have to put on the lights, often at all.
And so I remember was the swimming pool.
Yes. The swimming pool, it was the first fully natural swimming pool that was ever built. Where we used aquatic plants to clean the water, not a drop of any chemical. Because I was very clear that I needed a swimming pool, because a resort, people come on leisure, they need a swimming pool. And I remember a lot of people turned around and asked me the question saying, hang on, a swimming pool is a luxury where people just lap around in the water when there are millions of people who don't have enough water in this world. And this is where I say sustainability is very, when you look at sustainability in different sectors, you have to look at it very differently. In a hospitality sector, you need a swimming pool. It's simple as that. Now, you have a choice of the kind of swimming pool you want to use.
Correct.
So after, months of research, is when I discovered this design, using the help of my architects. Of course, the pool was a scientific pool. We used
like a
to
pond, actually, literally.
It looked like a pond, but the background of it was very, very scientific. A lot of technology went into it. So, for example, to prevent algae from forming, the technology was such that if the pH level of the water is low enough, algae will not form. So we used to pass the water through carbon fibers, and when you pass the water through that, the pH level will automatically fall, and then we aerate the water to ensure that it doesn't get too warm. So all these things were used to ensure that the pH level was low, so that algae doesn't form. We're all used to ponds in this country.
Yeah, and also the recycling, grey water. I still remember, that was the first time I saw such a large and a consolidated area where you used canna to clean up, the grey water.
Yeah, we had reed beds to clean all the grey water. And these are all, again, they're very simple principles.
Yes.
This is where I tell everybody when they say, oh my God, it's all complicated. I say, no. Yeah. Using plants to clean water is an age-old technique in our country.
Yes.
Right? So it's nothing modern. But the challenge is because we've all gone so far down the path of what we call of progress.
Progress, yes.
Pedaling back to being sustainable seems to be a challenge, right? So yes, all our grey water was, recycled using reed beds. All my black water, we use leach pits, and we still use the leach pits for all our black water. Yeah. All my waste, I always say, I used to process it and reuse it in different manners. Except the plastic, we used to send it out to a plastic recycling unit.
Didn't you have cows on the?
Yeah.
So I remember a lot of the waste, kitchen waste, the organic kitchen waste used to go to the cows, right?
Yeah, they used to go to the cows. A lot of the cow dung used to come into
biogas.
Into my biogas
Brilliant.
plant. So
Brilliant.
That's when I used to tell people, literally with bullshit, I used to generate electricity.
Yeah.
But
I don't. Let's talk about food. I just remember, way before this whole fad for nachini, ragi. I was reading in the Sunday Times, that all the actresses, they like to eat nachini, ragi. And this whole thing for millets, this whole craze for the fad for millet happened. I remember having millet upma and ragi dosa with you.
Yes, and moringa leaves.
Moringa leaves.
Moringa today is a superfood, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. So I had a huge lawn. Like every resort should have a lawn. Yeah. I was told those days, right? So I had this huge lawn. Yes. But even my lawn, I didn't plant, this ornamental,
exotic,
Florida grass and whatever else. I just grew my regular native grass because that is very, very hardy. And my lawnmowers were my cows. And so it was a beautiful lawn. But I somewhere discovered that, you need a lawn where you don't have any other beautiful open spaces for guests. And we had an abundance of that, 12 acres of land where guests could walk around. I had the grassland next to me. So that's when I told myself that I took my journey, next step towards sustainability from a food perspective. I said that I want to grow all our food. I ripped apart my lawn completely and I started growing all our food there. And the interesting thing, today farm to fork is a novel concept, right? In the UK, I remember there was this one chef who charged, I think, close to 200 pounds for a plate, and he had a 6 months waiting list only because he used to harvest his vegetables and serve it straight away onto the plate. So we did that, where, in fact, at lunchtime when people used to come to the resort, you regularly a table in a hotel or a resort in the restaurant will have forks, knives, spoons, everything else around it, right? I used to have a bare table with just a bamboo basket on it, with a little note inside there. If you read it, it said that, what's a bamboo basket doing on my table? And I used to tell people, read the instructions carefully. I used to tell them, look at the blackboard on to your right. The blackboard had a menu of all that we were going to serve.
And today you need a QR code.
Today, and I didn't have a huge menu, right? I had 2 soups, 3 starters, 2 salads, and guests were happy with that. But importantly, they used to place their order. I used to give them the basket. They used to go with the waiter, harvest their own vegetables, come and give it to the kitchen, and the chef used to cook it for them in half an hour and give it. It was a delightful experience because people actually connected with the vegetables, connected with the land. They harvested it themselves. And so, I used to grow, and all my vegetables except the pulses and some cereals which I hadn't grown at that time. Everything else I used to grow and serve on the resort.
How do you create the narrative for the traveler to be looking at something like this and saying, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to take the children. So that you come back from there and you carry some of the, even if a little bit of it comes back with you. Maybe you just start composting. After being inspired, how do you bring it back with you? How do you create that space for change and transformation? We still have the same the same challenge we have, right? But you must have had a lot of guests who must have stayed and they must be in touch with you. How are they still in touch with you? Some of them who...
Oh yes. 60-70% of my business those days used to be repeats or referrals. I used to have people who used to come at least once a week. They used to just sit down there and say, we just want to be here. That's all. And people used to take away parts of my resort also. I used to have my shampoos in terracotta bottles.
In terracotta bottles,
Some of them used to ask me and take it away. Some of them used to steal it, and we never minded because they're taking away a part of us to remember us forever. But most importantly, it was the experiences. And it's strange you asked me this question. Just last week, I had somebody who had come back to the resort and they called for me and they said, listen, I don't know if you remember us. We were here 10 years ago and we want to meet you. And I went and they came back with their child. That time, that lady was just pregnant with the child and the child was about 8 to 10 years ago. And they recounted, much like you, all the experiences. And they talked and they remembered so vividly how they played, all the rural games.
The rural games,
flying kites and, spinning tops and learning how to milk a cow and going on a bullock cart ride. And that person actually tried to get a bullock cart driving license those days. I used to
those days, I remember that.
He recalled every one of it. And this is where, I tell people that people will come back if you deliver experiences which are enriching, which touches them at a very soul level, which touches them in their heart. People will come back. They will remember you. You don't need to do much marketing.
10 years later, if you remember,
And I didn't have much, money to do my marketing. You remember the conversations we've had around this subject, right? Yet, we just depended on customers to remember us, to take back a memory and come back with it or tell others with it.
You're also on board GSTC and you lead their services and their interest in India, right? So how does that pan out? And as somebody who's associated with GSTC, what does your responsibilities entail?
So I joined the GSTC at the time when it was formed because I was looking for a standard that respected what I was doing on my resort. That was my starting point because all the existing certifications and all that didn't sort of come up to what it was that I was doing on my resort. Like I told you, 70% electricity generation, nobody wanted all that. That's when I joined the GSTC and I've been part of the election committee for 2-3 terms, and then I got elected as a board member, and I'm serving my second term as a board member. So at the GSTC, what we do is we set standards globally. We are not a certification agency. We don't certify anybody. We are what is known as a standard setting body globally. We were charged by the United Nations system, the UNEP, the UNWTO, to come up with standards globally for tourism to be more sustainable, which followed the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. So what we do is we encourage people to follow the standards, because these standards we arrived at after 8 or 10 years of research and looking at the market. So these standards are available free of charge for anybody. They can download it from our website, the gstc.org website. So what we have done is we have told the hospitality industry what is it that they should do to become more sustainable, the tourism industry in general. So there are three sectors. There's hotels and resorts, travel operators, travel agents, and destinations. So we have given an institutional framework on what you need to do at the ground level to become more sustainable. So it's really like a roadmap that we have given people. We have given a framework. Now what is happening today is, anecdotally, people do some aspect of sustainability. As a result of it, there is some amount of greenwashing, as we call it, right? You just do a bits and pieces here and there, and then you suddenly declare that you are an eco resort or a sustainable resort. A lot of people are saying, listen, what do we do? I own a hotel or a resort. I'm a travel agent. I'm a travel operator. I manage a destination. What do I do? This is what the GSTC standards are. We have an institutional framework so that everybody can follow the same framework, so that the customer eventually can base their judgment on where to travel, where not to travel, based on one common minimum standard. That is what the GSTC does. So we brought it to India in 2010, like I had mentioned, and the Indian Sustainable Tourism Criteria was formed, not implemented in its full spirit and word. But so my quest in India is to encourage the industry to start to follow the norms. And if the industry says, hey, we want to follow the norms, and now we want market access, which means what? I follow the norms, I get myself certified as a sustainable resort, and there are certifying bodies in India which do the certification for you. There is Control Union, there is Bureau Veritas, there are lots of others who are certification bodies. So once you want market access, large travel companies like bookings.com, for example, have also subscribed to the GSTC standards because it is a global standard, it's a UN-led standard. Then what will happen is slowly all these large companies will start to promote hotels, resorts, travel agents who are sustainable, who are certified sustainable. But certification is not necessary. If somebody says, I just want to follow the norms, that framework is available. That institutional framework is available at the GSTC.
They also run training programs.
Oh yes. So part of forming the standards is we do training programs. We certify people who go through our training programs. I'm a certified trainer with the GSTC system again. So we do training programs for people who want to be GSTC certified professionals. We do certification for auditing bodies. So any certification body who needs their auditors trained, we do those. So yeah, training is a large part of what we do.
But some of the travel companies, especially some companies from abroad, I see the stamp. They use that GSTC logo on their websites. Now, if that is not a certification body, what does that mean? If they have the stamp on their website?
Yeah, so we have different levels. We have certification bodies who do certification, much like you get an ISO certification or whatever.
Okay.
So people like Bureau Veritas do that. People like Control Union do that. They do that globally for tourism using the GSTC standards.
So now, they will give the
certification. Okay. But we also have others who have had their standards recognized by GSTC.
You'd come up with a book, right? On
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I wrote a book about it, and quite honestly, it was not ever in my radar screen to write a book. But interestingly, what happened was, I remember a lot of people, whenever I used to travel outside the country or even in the country, and people used to ask me, how the hell did you do this? Why did you do this? It seems so far-fetched because of all the detail that we went into.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thought I was an engineer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not. I'm just an English literature graduate, from Loyola College in Chennai. Yeah. So I'm not an engineer. And everybody used to say, but hang on. how did you employ all the sustainable technologies? Because remember, from my biogas plant onwards, I had to re-engineer my biogas plant over and over again, especially my storage systems. And it was one of these conversations with one of them when they said that, how did you do it? You're not an engineer. And I just said, I was just passionate about it. And I just went about it intuitively. And every problem, we just attacked it head on. And that's how we found the solutions.
Absolutely.
And when this person asked me those, very trying questions, I remember, and that's when he told me, he said, my God, if you're not an engineer and you've done this, you need to record this. And I was like, yeah, forget it. Doesn't matter. And then, somebody else told me something very important. They said that, it'll be very selfish of you if you don't record it.
Right.
What if tomorrow you get hit by a truck?
That's what the book is about.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's when I said, okay, I better record it because it would be irresponsible of me not to record it. And
record it. The journey.
That's
absolutely.
when I set about writing the whole book. And it's called Green Dreams.
So one question that we were talking about, and we sidestepped into customer experience. It was about the team, the local. I mean, the staff that you hired. And
so when I started the resort, 80% of my staff was local staff.
Yeah.
Because that's how I wanted it to be. So part of the sustainability journey is what we call social sustainability.
Yeah.
Which has to do with sustaining people who live around your resort, especially if it's a rural setting. It was a challenge, I'll be honest. I'm not saying it wasn't. We went through many
challenge in the sense, in terms of training them into hospitality?
Yeah, training was also easy, right? I remember I used to have a boy who used to, wash vessels. And, he used to watch all these waiters carrying around trays. And he one day came and told me, sir, I want to do that. It didn't take me more than a couple of hours to train him to hold a tray and not drop things in it, right? So training was not so difficult because for me, what was important that they remained them.
Yes.
I did not teach them to smile. I did not teach them to greet a guest. I did not have to teach them etiquette with a guest because they had it inside them. And whenever they saw a guest, they were just so grateful that a guest was there, and they were also so happy, and it's novel to have a guest. So they would start chatting with them. Their smiles used to be genuine. They used to automatically say namaskara, sir, instead of saying good morning, good evening.
It's a namaskara.
And it was okay. So on all the soft aspects of hospitality where the industry spends millions of rupees training them, I didn't have to spend that money because it came from them, right? Yes, I did have a challenge with issues concerning, discipline in quotes.
Yeah.
So in the hospitality industry, we need predictability, right?
Yeah.
You need to know that all your staff will be there when guests walk in because you take, bookings in advance. That was a bit of a challenge. And I remember once when, my cook, Venkatesh, he decided to go on a break somewhere. And I told him, Venkatesh, you better come back in 3 days. He said, absolutely. 3 days I'll come back because the fourth day I had, about 50 people staying. And he didn't come back after 3 days. After 4 days, he came back after 2 weeks. And I remember looking at him and saying, when he came back, what happened, man? Why didn't you come back? You knew we had guests. And he said, oh my God, it completely slipped my mind. You had guests. Sir, were the guests happy? Did everything go okay? That was the first question. And I said, oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody went happy. He said, oh, thank God for that. I'm very happy. I said, okay, Venkatesh, but what the hell happened?
Yeah.
I was coming back home and I saw my cousin and he told me, hey, Venkatesh, we've not met in so long. We started chatting and I went to his village and we chatted. I suddenly realized, oh my God, it was 2 weeks. And I came running back to work.
Oh God.
And he tells me, sir, you have to cut my salary. I said, of course I'm going to cut your salary.
Yeah.
And I was still frothing with anger. And he had this look in his face, Shoba, where I could almost hear him thinking, what is the problem now? I mean, your guests went away happy. You're cutting my salary. What are you still ranting and raving about? Honestly, that's when the penny dropped in my head.
Yes.
What was the penny that dropped in my head? His first priority was his family and his friends. My first priority was work.
Yeah.
So I had an ethical dilemma
Yeah.
to tell him, shift your priority away from your family and friends into work. That is what we all do, right? I mean, I was in the corporate world for more than 2.5 decades. We were all told your first priority has got to be work. Yes, lip service, HR tells us your priority has to be your family. But our bosses always told us, boss, you better come to work, okay? I don't care what happens to you. So I had an ethical dilemma on shifting his priorities, and I refused to do that. I said, no. His first priority is his family and his friends, and that is right. I need to prioritize my family and my friends over my work. So with that lesson, what I did was, because I couldn't get predictability and dependence, because these guys would take off whenever I wanted.
That was a challenge.
Yeah. So I reduced my 80% dependence on local labor to about 50-60%, and I got people from outside. And when I did this reduction, it's not that I had to fire them. There would people who will just say, oh sir, I'm bored, I want to go back and till my field, or I want to go back to being a mason or a carpenter. So I reduced my dependence. So 50-60% were people from outside, 50-60% from the resort, and that worked very well.
Worked. Yeah.
You know? So this is how I managed my staffing using local staff.
Fantastic.
And in fact, a UK university actually did a case study on this, on reprioritization of staffing issues to suit sectors. That was the topic of it. How do you reprioritize to ensure that your sector comes out sustainably?
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very important point, I think, especially when you work with the local communities. It is very important to, it's very important to ensure that you work around their priorities. And I see that happening with a lot of my hotels, and which is why the good number is 70-30. I mean, for them, they try and keep it 70-30. Ram, I just want to point out one important question that has been going around in the industry, that where, a lot of people say that because of this whole germophobia around the COVID issue, that, sustainability has to take a backseat. I mean, this is something I argue against. What do you think about? I mean, how do you think that this has to be that this has to be looked at this point in time?
Yeah, unfortunately, that will happen, and it will take an enlightened CEO or an enlightened owner to say, no, sustainability has to come to the forefront now.
Yes, yeah.
But 80-90% or 95% of hotels and resorts don't run that way in this country. Yeah. So everybody is going to say, listen, let's just get revenues, forget about sustainability for now, sell cheap, fill the rooms is what is going to happen, unfortunately.
It is happening,
But they will be making a big mistake, because it's a question of time before the government starts imposing carbon taxation.
Yeah.
It's a question of time before tourism policy starts to reward sustainability and not reward people who are not sustainable. It's a question of time. So an enlightened CEO will ensure that he does something now and build it into his balance sheet, so that he starts the journey now. In 4-5 years, it becomes completely sustainable. Otherwise, it will hit every sector. It's already hit sectors like coal and steel and cement. It's a question of time before it hits the hospitality segment.
Services,
everybody knows, I mean, the economists know that the value a resort or a hotel adds back to the economy is disproportionate to the resources they consume.
Absolutely.
Hotels, I mean, guests in a hotel consume 7 to 9 times water than the people around there.
It's
not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
It will come down soon. It will hit people. Those who are, like I said, the only way I can describe them are enlightened, forward-looking CEOs. They will be able to see this is coming, and I hope they do for their own good.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point. And while we're talking about the government, impositions and implementation on this, what did you think about the tourism policy, the national tourism policy that came out recently? Do you think the responsible tourism was adequately represented in the policy, you think?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm on the board of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, which is a standard-setting body globally for sustainability in tourism.
Yeah.
So I looked at the tourism policy with that lens, and I must say the tourism policy has come a long way. They have a definitive mention about sustainability, about responsibility. They talk about destination management organizations. All that is there. But what was lacking in it was that while it defined sustainability, responsibility, and all of that, it did not give a definitive framework that people have to follow. Now, all policies have to be general, all policies have to be overarching, but all policies also have to give direction for people to follow. You know, tourism is a state subject in this country. All state governments are also formulating their policy and they look for direction from the national policy. If the national policy had said, you have to be sustainable and here is the institutional framework, follow this framework and you will be sustainable, then everybody else would have drawn from that mother tree. But that was not there in the policy. It's still at draft stage. So I've written to the tourism ministry about it, and I'm hoping that they will look at it and consult people like us from the Global Sustainable Tourism Council so that we can guide them on how to do it like we do with governments across the world.
But you were a part of the STCI, you know, so that policy, that the framework is there, right? The directives for that are there, yeah?
Absolutely. The Global Sustainable Tourism Council was brought to India in 2010 by the then Tourism Secretary Sujit Banerjee. And we launched it in India. After that, we developed the Indian Sustainable Tourism Criteria. But unfortunately, after that, you know, it's gone through, you know, various hurdles on who wanted to own that. Well, the government needs to own that. Okay, that needs to be updated, and that's not a big deal. It can be done. Once it is updated, that should become the national standard that the government of India, Ministry of Tourism should own. When I say they should own that, they don't have to do implementation. They just set the standard and others will come and do the implementation. So yes, the ISTC does exist. It needs to be updated. And once it's updated and, you know, the government decides to own it, things can happen. There is an opportunity. And I hope we don't miss out on this opportunity.
Yeah, I think so too. And on that note, Ram, this was a hugely interesting and informative chat you've given us in the morning today. I'm sure you have a very, very busy schedule. Your book, The Green Dreams, is something that I'm going to be looking at. And for everybody who's listening in, it is available on Amazon, right?
Yeah. You can download the ebook,
Yeah, and Ram is also a prolific blogger. His website is cbramkumar.com. You can get a lot of there are lots of blogs that are very, very interesting. Do go and check them out. And thank you for watching this show. It's always a pleasure bringing to you these amazing people who walk this path of responsible tourism and sustainability. Kindly leave comments. Please share with your friends and your associates. The whole word and the idea and the intent for responsible tourism has to be forwarded, has to be shared, and has to become a common purpose for all of us in tourism. Only then we can look at a tourism that puts planet and people first. On that note, thank you very much. Thank you, Ram. That was really, really enlightening. It was a very interesting conversation. I really loved it. Yeah. So much to learn. So much to learn. Thank you. Thanks so much.